Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lucy and this is the second in a series of 4 reviews I'll be doing on the music of Blimp, Blimp, Deb Limp, or however that's supposed to be said. This review is on Rhino Giraffe Man, the first half of a dual album alongside Pink Goyim. If you haven't checked out my review of Blimp's Kill Artist, I'd recommend you do so now before diving into this review, as there will be references to the previous. Rhino Giraffe Man and Pink Goyim were both released on the same day in November 2020 and feature a lot of callbacks to each other, but they were released separately as separate albums, so I'm not sure I'd call this a double album. I'll be reviewing Rhino Giraffe Man and its own merits first of all, and during the review for Pink Goyim, I'll be referencing both pieces of work and how they support and detract from each other. This of course isn't ideal, but the releases are listed as separate albums, so I feel I should respect this even if it wasn't necessarily the artist's intention. A listener stumbling across this music, might listen to one of the two first and foremost, so I'll be pretending that's exactly what's happened to me. Unfortunately, when reviewing albums like this, one album has to go first, and it looks like Rhino Giraffe Man has the honours. One of my main criticisms of Kill Artist was that the drums and bass are often out of time with each other. On Kill Artist, this problem came up 10 seconds into the first track. Blimp has answered the biggest question I had. Were the drums and bass fixed? A mere 2 seconds into the first track this time, so I'll have to give him props for efficiency. I'm not sure what the problem is here. The guitar playing is often right on the beat and played pretty competently. It's just the bass and the drums that don't want to play along with the rest of the stems. I can say that the bass on Rhino Giraffe Man is at least more melodic than on Kill Artist. In fact, this can be said for most of the album. It's more melodic and it's a bit more experimental. Occasionally we're treated to an interesting coda instead of a song losing direction and just kind of ending, which itself is a net positive. The vocals for the most part on this album aren't quite as engrossing as on Kill Artist. They're a little bit more singy. I'm not sure if that's a word, but I'm sticking with it for the sake of this review. Whereas in Kill Artist, the vocals were treated almost like they were any other instrument. In Rhino Giraffe Man, they're front and centre for most of the more interesting tracks, jumping between interesting lyrical themes and being used as interesting sonic textures. When they do decide to take a back seat, they're just not quite as interesting. I don't feel Blimpy has given us his A-game here, but at least it manages to keep your attention, as a thematic part of the songs where vocals are featured prominently. In terms of instrumentation, the guitars are back in full force, this time often a little less MIDI than in Kill Artist, and with a little bit more clarity in the high end. I'm not sure if this was an intentional choice or if it just kind of happened, but you can generally pick out each individual note when listening, which wasn't something that you could do in Kill Artist. Guitar parts will fade in and out, sometimes double tracked, sometimes just to provide an interesting counterpoint to the vocal melodies and carry the songs a little bit better. Aside from the guitars, you'll also hear what sounds like a small sine wave synthesizer providing backing to the guitars and vocals, or at least something that's approximating it. For all I know, Blimp doesn't know what a synthesizer is. The lyrics are a lot more competent in Rhino Giraffe Man than anything that Kill Artist had to offer. They're inventive without diving into obscure avant-garde territory, which I don't feel would be a good fit for Blimpy. They're somewhat competently sung as well. The apprehensive vocal approach of Kill Artist occasionally shows up, but for the most part, hearing Blimp Man sing his songs about magic rhinos and inbreeding is much more pleasant than it's ever been. The early highlights, such as Eyes of Rhino, Rhino Giraffe Man, PT Period 1, and Blue Healer, feel almost like they could be part of a promotional EP. I can see Limp using these tracks to attract potential fans to his music, as they carry across exactly what the band is all about, at least around the time this album came out. They're a band that like melodic, inventive riffs and weird lyrics, and I think Rhino Giraffe Man, PT Period 1, which is a pretty weird title, is the most Blimp song on the album. It even has a moment where everyone involved just kind of forgets what they're supposed to be doing, but this time they come back for the outro section. It's a great introduction to what these guys are trying to do. A particular highlight is a strong dynamic range found throughout the first half of the album. I know I already mentioned this in my Kill Artist review and briefly here, but the drum mixing is probably the biggest thing stopping this album from being a truly great listen. The drum mixing is largely muddy and mostly behind the mix. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it sounds like the drums were mixed separately and then pasted into the project. I'm not sure if this is what's happened here, but if not, then it's a damn good impression of this kind of mixing. There's very little dynamic range within the drum patterns themselves. You'll often hear the same kick sample hit throughout the song at the same volume at the same timbre. Conversely, you'll always hear the same snare hit in the same way and the same hi-hat sample, which sounds like they're trying to imitate machine guns in places. Mercifully, the album also does away with the flow-destroying sketches of Kill Artist, and I can't stress this enough, it makes for a much more cohesive listen. I know it's a common trope among indie musicians to put these short 30 to 60 second instrumentals into their albums, but unless it aids the flow from getting from song A to song B, then they're absolutely pointless. Thankfully, this is a null issue on Rhino Giraffe Man, as these transitional moments have instead been woven into the compositions themselves. This comes down to the old saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should. While Kill Artist suffered a lot from songs lacking direction as they went on, I'm happy to say that this is a much less prominent problem in Rhino Giraffe Man. Songs seem like they've been crafted with a beginning, middle and end point, and I'm not just talking lyrically, it feels like the guitar parts will change and move towards the common goal at the end of the song. Well, for the most part. It still sounds like there's a lot of aimlessness within the compositions that have been added for the sake of variation, even when they don't necessarily work to the song's benefit. I mean, sure, you can add this cool halftime riff in the middle of your weird song about rhinos, but the question that Devinimp needs to ask himself is, should he do this? I won't argue that it creates variety for the listener, but at a certain point, variety and consistency need to coexist in equal phase of each other, or else you'll get a nonsensical album and repeated listens with obvious high points and low points. I'm talking as if this is something that really bothers me about the album, but honestly it happens maybe 3 times across the 9 songs, but I must say that on repeated or abridged listens, these sections are when I decide to skip to the next song. As with Kill Artist, I'm not convinced the album itself was actually mastered. You're going to hear small differences in volume all over the album. If you can look past this, it's fine, but I feel it doesn't create a consistent listen. This might not be a problem on a first listen, but on listen 2, 3, 4 and 5, if you're really into the album, you might be asking yourself, why have I got to turn my speakers up for this track and down again for this other track? It sounds crazy to say this, but it's something that really needs to be addressed in a potential remaster down the line. When I say remaster, maybe first master would be a more appropriate term. So that's another Blimp album. Part 1 of a supposed double release. Is it worth checking out? Well, yes, it's probably worth a few listens. If you're only going to listen to one album by Deep Blimpy, listen to this one. If you're only going to listen to one half of one album by Limp, I'd recommend up to the end of Disestablishment. If you don't like what you're hearing, then you're probably not going to enjoy the rest of the album or even the rest of their discography. The first half here is pure distilled Deep Limp. If you don't get it, then you don't get it, and that's fine. Next, I'll be taking a look at Pink Goleam. See you next time.